This conference will now be recorded.
Nope, that's the one you're on. There we go.
Does everybody see that?
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
Go.
Yeah, can see.
I guess I won't see your whether you want to ask a question because you're going to be. I can't see whether you're muted or unmuted right now. So we will just kind of speak up, unmute yourself, speak up, and then we'll stop and listen to your question. Okay. So this is a session on container gardening, and hosted by County of Barrhead and Brazeau County. And it's really nice that they've given us this opportunity to get together and talk. Spring is starting to come and we're getting excited. And I know I couldn't help myself. I planted a couple of things myself into some containers. Anyway, and Kyle's really surprised at that.
So surprised.
Yeah. Anyway, we shall carry on. So what is the appeal of container gardening? Well, a lot of people lack the space. It's easy to maintain. There's satisfaction in watching things grow. Everybody gets excited about things growing. When they lack space, you want to try to get something growing out there, especially with the cost of vegetables these days. So you get some fresh vegetables. Sometimes they're used to beautify certain areas like your decks and balconies and just corners that didn't grow anything before. You'd like to grow something in those corners that is a little more attractive than a few weeds growing there. Container plantings provide ideal growing conditions. So usually with the container, you're going to get some pretty good conditions. So very productive, and they're versatile and can be used anywhere. So yeah. The other things is you can start right away. The container gardenings are ideal if you're not sure of what plants you're growing. You should be looking up any plant that you're growing just to make sure that they're not a noxious weed or a prohibitive weed. But if you're absolutely not sure, if you grow them in a container, you can control them a little bit. Don't plant them in your garden, your big gardens, because if they take off, you're going to have a devil of a time controlling them. Container plantings save time and money. You can grow a lot of plants in a small area. And the container plantings create instant impact. So if you've got them growing nicely, or if you go into a garden center and they've got them growing, you can bring them home and they're there already, and they can really change the look of your place. Containers make maintenance easy. It's easy to pull the weeds out of them. If they're a little more compacted, the weeds have a tougher time making things go once you've weeded them the first time. And unfortunately, weed seeds do blow into those small containers, so you will get some weeds coming up throughout the season. Mobility, in some cases, the number one, you can move the pots around if you don't really like where they're at. And number two, you can, if you've got problems leaning over, the type of container that you get will help with those mobility issues. You might not have to lean over as far, or you can sit on a stool and weed them. You don't have to have a lot of big, heavy gardening tools, and you get better use of your fertilizers because it's more concentrated to the plants themselves as opposed to in between the rows of a regular garden. And in some cases, you can put up things that will grow that will give you some privacy from the neighbors. I'm just hoping I don't. Deciding what containers to use are based on available shape and the shape of the space. Sometimes you got corner boxes and smaller pots. It depends also on those mobility issues. If you've got stand-up boxes for those that can't bend over for long periods of time, or you might have a container or a box that's sitting on the ground with a little seat on it that you can sit and just bend over. What determines your type of container is how long you're going to need it. If you're only going to need it for 5 years, that will determine the material that you're going to be using to make those containers or what kind of containers you're going to purchase. If you're only using them for 5 years, you can get away with a lot of cheaper material. And most important, the types of containers depend on what you like. Don't be worried about what the neighbors like unless you're in an area where they have homeowners associations and they determine what kind of things you can use. You do want to get along with your neighbors, but it's important that you like what you're doing. So different containers for different places. On decks around the yard, generally your containers are smaller decorative containers because of the space. So they can be pots, nice different types of pots, ceramic pots, clay pots. You can have the raised boxes or the rail planters, and those help out on smaller decks if you don't have any available place for a garden in the yard whatsoever. In the yard, you can have more bigger decorative pots, or you can have the ground boxes, which we'll show in a bit. So the garden, you can also make basically raised beds in your garden just by raising the soil into a square. And then you get into the square foot gardening, which is easy to maintain because it's got to do with more with what your brain is thinking. If I'm going to go out, I can just weed 2 or 3 of those squares, and eventually you can weed out the whole garden, and it doesn't seem like overwhelming work. So here's a garden. This is actually my friend's garden, backyard, I should say. She does have 2 garden spots way in the corner to the right, but you don't see them in this picture. So out of her garden, it's important you can pick anything you want. We can tell you that what's best in those areas, but it doesn't mean that you can't use other containers as well. You're the one that is appreciating this. In her case, this is one shot of her garden. This is another. She has close to 200 pots every year that she does.
Wow.
Now, normally in a yard this size, you're thinking pots are going to be a ton of work for her to water all those pots. Well, she employs her husband to help her. He's tried to resign several times in writing and verbally, and still hasn't, she's never accepted his resignation. However, she really enjoys this. She does majority of the watering. She does majority of the planting. She grows all the flowers, starts them from seed, and she has some problems with a little bit of arthritis, so she likes to keep moving to keep that at bay. And this is what she likes to do all summer long. So when you go and sit in her yard, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And some would say, well, lots of pots, but you learn to really appreciate all the work that she's doing in there, and it's her yard, so she enjoys it. Okay, so deck and balcony containers, generally smaller for space, often decorative pots, smaller wooded planters or rail planters. Does not mean that you cannot come up with your own ideas. There is some of the pots and stuff that April has, or they're actually soil put into old purses, and she just plops the plant into them. And things like teapots. She collects all these really fancy teapots, and then Brian has to drill a hole through them. And that's no fun, drilling a hole through a teapot, let me tell you. Anyway, she enjoys it. So you have to ensure that you've got drainage water flows away from the building. If you've got a pot that you have drilled the holes in, be very careful that you're not having water flow towards the building, causing some rot, and it should flow off the deck. If you have problems with that issue, then you should have a drip pan under that pot, making sure that you don't get water sitting under the pot. You don't want to have rot on your deck. Is it worth growing things if you're rotting out your deck or rotting out parts of the house where it's flowing towards the house? I'm really dry. So I'll move on here. So sometimes you can get those pot rollers. It's just wheels under a metal plate that you can put under the larger pots so that you can move them around. If you need to get them out of the hot sun or under protection for hail, you can always throw something over them for hail if it's thick enough. But if you have an overhang or something and you want to protect them a little bit or put them into the shade, you can roll them around fairly easily that way. Small containers dry out very quickly, so they require more watering, particularly as the plants get bigger, and they also require more fertilizing because they don't have the space to absorb nutrients from great distances in the soil. Thank you, Kyle. So sometimes you can get those watering bulbs that you place upside down, or a pop bottle that you can put upside down into the container that slowly releases water. Thanks. Talking about water, I was getting dry. So anyway, you can place the bottles upside down, and as the soil dries out, it allows air into the bulbs or into the water, and it releases the water. I strongly suggest, though, however, that you try them out. If you're going to go away on holidays, try them out first. Depending on the type of soil that you've got in there, it will release slowly, or it could be all gone in one day. We had one year we went away for Christmas, and we had a self-watering thing for our live Christmas tree. Came back and the thing had emptied out entirely into the pan and overflowed onto our hardwood floor. We ended up with warps in the floor, and I thought we'd have to redo the whole floor. But it did go down after it dried out, so you can't even tell right now. But try things out before you go away, and you think that just in case there is the risk that you might have to get somebody in quickly to water your plants. Moisture control soil really helps. If you can pick up a bag of that, it's a little more expensive, but it will even out your watering so that your plants are a little less likely to dry out in between. One of the things that I found with the moisture control, we could water, and then down below it was still wet enough, and it was useful to use that material. I just have to find out where I'm at here. So, slight pause, sorry guys. So yeah, some of the soils that we get, the bought soils that we get, a lot of them are composed of basically peat moss and some sawdust and some other plant material that is not, you don't get the good old-fashioned soil mixed in. And in fact, if you look at the label on the bag, it will tell you what's in them. But it also means that they dry out a little bit quicker and they degrade faster in the pot. So one of the things that you can do, having heavy pots to move around, is sometimes difficult to handle. You don't really want to move them, although you should shift them now and again in case there's water sitting under the pot from a rainstorm or whatever, or they've leaked out and over. You don't want your deck rotting up underneath the pot, or the weathering that you've put on your deck to lose its stain or lose its, in some cases, the vinyl carpeting will get wrecked. So move them around a little bit, and this is why I kind of suggest the rollers, especially if you got bigger pots. Some of the other ways that you can reduce the weight of those pots is most of your plants are only going to have a root depth of about 10 inches, maybe 12. If that pot's much taller than that, put some of, do they see this arrow? Do you think?
You should, yeah.
Okay. Are you guys seeing that arrow moving? Can you hear me?
Well, they can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, can you see this little arrow?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, they put peanuts in the bottom, those styrofoam peanuts, and then a layer of some fabric. And then they put their soil on top, because that plant's not going to need to go have roots that go right to the bottom.
No.
If you've got 10 inches on there, that's usually plenty for most of your flowering plants. If you're looking at carrots that can go a little bit deeper, sometimes I recommend 18 because if you're really doing well with some of your rooted plants like parsnips and stuff like that, it can go a little bit deeper. But this makes that pot a whole lot lighter, and it also, you don't have to buy so much soil. And the soil can be fairly expensive when you get at it. If you've got a lot of pots, a lot of you guys will know that. The other things that you can put in the bottom of those pots are things like, I've put a pop bottle in there, some of the liter size pop bottles to take up some space. Uh, Clay pot or pots, plastic pots turned upside down so that you've got an empty base underneath and they drain better. And also, clay, little bits of clay pots here and there, or just anything that, some cases you can put twigs and little bits of log in there, just to reduce the amount of soil that you have to put into that pot. As I say, it's really quite expensive to buy it. These are kind of some of the wooden types of boxes that you can get for your deck. There again, you kind of got to watch the drainage, make sure you've got flow away and that they're drying out. The dog doesn't come with the pots, but he's cute anyway. Sometimes they have these little sitting area or little tops on these wooden containers. That's great for putting your coffee and tea on. And they're very decorative. They look nice in front of a house. Oops, did I miss one? Nope. Okay, the other thing you can get is these types of planters, where it's more at your level that you don't have to bend over at all. I have something very similar to this for my herbs. So it's nice to have them on wheels, because if you want to move them around, they're pretty heavy. You're not going to move them very far without the wheels. We have it, but I get my son over to help move them. He's quite strong. And I'm thinking about putting wheels on the bottom. Always helps if you let the soil dry out really, really well before you try to move them. And then in this case, they have something under there so that you can put your tools and your watering cans and things. Well, we'll go back to this. Now, some of these containers you can pick up quite reasonable, and others are really crazy expensive. So shop around if you're looking at something like this. The odd time we buy at Lee Valley, but it can be quite expensive. Costco gets some in. Sometimes these things can be made out of composite board or vinyl, and then they're lighter to move around, plus they don't rot out as quickly. There again, it depends on how long you want to be growing these things. Are you looking at 5, 10, 15 years? Are you thinking about how decorative, what is your likes? Do you like the wood look, or do you like something else a little bit better? Here's some other ideas for containers. This person has put them into an old wooden crate. Looks good. And it's not just flowers. We're talking about vegetables and everything else, just about everything. I had an old canner that kind of started to wear out at the bottom. It ended up rusting out. So it had holes in the bottom, and used the canner to put some of my carrots and stuff in. Here's another idea, an old shoe container, shoe that you sling over the door. This is kind of ideal for herbs. They would dry out pretty quickly with these plastic or with the cloth pockets, but they're separated. You could write on there, the name of your herb, and you would until you get to recognize them all. And there's so many different kinds that I have trouble recognizing them all. When I get them in my herb box, if they start to intermingle, then you have a real tricky time. And this kind of divides them easily, and you can tell exactly if you wrote on there that, this is one of them is a mint, and one is a spearmint, and one is a peppermint, because you can get all three different kinds, a lemon mint. Then it would be easy to figure out. You just go from the stem up and make sure you got the right plant. Some people had ideas with their old pots that got cracked. For decorative decorative purposes. I think I need more water. Its mouth is sticking. You can do little things like this. Um, with your pots, the one thing that you should try to do is make sure that your plants that you put in the individual pots kind of like the same type of environment. So if you like plants that, or you want a plant that likes shade, make sure you put any accompanying plants in with it also like shade. Or maybe you don't like as much water, if they should be all similar, so that when you move the pot around, you're not killing off one of the plants in your pot and leaving a big hole in it. I just threw this idea, and this person was using some chopsticks to put their labels on with, which is good because if anybody's used popsicle sticks, the letters wear off really quickly. They absorb the water and the letters just disappear. Chopsticks, not so much. I've tried plastic knives, and they last better than a wooden stick. Actually, the best thing is if you can keep your labels from your plants, from your flowers, from the greenhouse, and just cross out what's on them and write it on. They last for quite a while on there. Here's another guy. Somebody took all of their kids' boots and threw plants in them. Okay. So can we just switch back to people for a second?
Yeah, just press escape on the top, on the keyboard.
Oh, okay. So we just stopped for a second. Anybody got any questions? I can see the icons to see if you're on there.
I'm Marilyn Carol Lee here.
Yeah.
Just saying that Phil LaFave builds all kinds of raised beds people can purchase.
Yeah, and they're beautiful. He sent me
They
some
are. They're
pictures
very
of
nice.
them.
Yeah.
And actually, further down in the slides, I'll show you a couple of them. But he's got all kinds of different shapes and sizes. He'll build you pretty much whatever shape and size that you want. Now, Drayton Valley, do you guys have a person over there that builds boxes?
There's a guy by the name of Cody Trimper that does it.
Who's that?
Cody Trimper. Trimper.
Trimper? Can you guys hear me a little bit better? I moved the mic.
Okay. If you want to write that down, Amber, so that people over there, when you get the question, then you can refer them over to him. They're not cheap when you buy the wooden boxes, depending on what you get. Some of them, like pine, untreated pine, is not that expensive, but cedar is more expensive. And there again, it depends on how long you want to maintain those boxes. Untreated pine, you're looking at about 5 to 7 years, whereas cedar, you're looking probably double that amount. You'll be getting 15 years out of it, but the wood, I can't give you prices on the wood because it varies so much, it changes so much. Carol, was there something else?
Yeah, is there any plant that should not go into container gardening?
Yeah, there's a couple, and we'll go through this as well, but I heard somebody mention they planted corn. They don't really recommend it, but you can get away with it because corn likes to fertilize. They fertilize corn in the wind, and generally you like to have about 15 plants to do that, but I have done it with 6. So it's not to say you can't do these things, it's just a little tougher to grow. So you might need to either self-pollinate them, like shake them together or whatever. It's just that they're trickier to pollinate when there's only a few of them. And asparagus is another one because it doesn't like your soil varying, shifting around. And with your pots, when you're putting in the Miracle Grows and the soil types that you get from the store, anything that has a lot of organic material in it, it can degrade. It starts to break down, and it breaks down when it gets wet. It starts to, like peat will start to break down into powder. After about 2.5 years, you can have you'll lose as much as 75% of the soil out of that pot just from it breaking down. And then the asparagus doesn't like that variation in soil depth, and you run into problems that way. So the best advice I can give to you guys is when you're doing pots and you're looking at plants, most of your garden plants are going to grow. Carrots, uh, parsnip, uh, lettuce, all beets, all of those are going to grow. But if you're trying something different, something new, research that plant to make sure. You can go on the internet, or you can look in books or talk to other people. If they're plants that are, temperamental to depths of soil, temperamental to heat and cold, you could have problems with those. Okay. Any other questions, or should we? Oh, there
How
we are.
often do you how often do
Pat,
you have
sorry.
to how often do you have to water planters?
Planters, well, the best way you can do that is because the soils are going to be different with every planter, depending on which kind you buy. With some of the soils, they've got moisture control in, so they are little beads in there that hold the water. You get them sometimes in your plants that you come from the flower place. They're little beads that hold water. So as the soil dries out, the little beads release the water, and in
Okay.
that case, you don't have to water them quite as often. Best way to tell is if you stick your finger in there and see if it's damp or not.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
that's the best I can tell you, Pat. I know you kind of like to water them all at once, but getting back to the pots on the decks, you can get away without having a pot that has holes in the bottom and risking, rot on your deck if you slip another pot inside of a pot that's got no holes in it. But then be very, very careful. If the pot fills with water, the plant will look like it's dry because it starts to weep over when it's actually drowning. So then you have to kind of make sure. You can tell if you lift the pot and it's heavier than usual, but that's the only problem with trying to do it that method. Okay. Heather, have you got a question, Heather? No? I got Heather M has got her mic on. I was just wondering if she had a question. Okay, any other questions, or should we move along? Okay, we're going to move along. So
Shoot that button again.
okay, so we'll get into some of the bigger yard, or into the yard type structures around the decks and stuff. So we're looking at something usually a little bit bigger, but as you saw my friend April, she uses pots and to make the yard look nice and decorative. There's nothing to say you can't do that. But generally you start to look at little bigger structures like wood boxes sitting on the ground, or standing height like the one that we showed where it was at the height of your waist and you had a little shelf on the bottom. You can go with galvanized steel tubs. The galvanized steel tubs last a little longer than the wood, but they're a little more expensive, and depending if you like the look of them or not. They come in different colors now, so you can get tubs in different colors. And sometimes people build a box around them, and it's all a matter of preference. If you like that look, that's fine. Uh, for me, it's not that I dislike it. It just reminds me of when I grew up on the farm, and that was the cattle's watering trough. So it's just a matter of what I grew up with. And then again, I have seen some really nice galvanized steel tubs that look very nice. Heavier grade plastic tubs, sometimes you can get them from a plastic tank dealer. We have a dealer in town here that he had some little feeders that he ended up taking the bottoms out of because the plastic didn't quite set. It set it kind of odd, and so he just took the bottoms out and used those sides as a box to put plants in. Something that's going to last for a really long time, of course, is bricks. Cinder or concrete blocks work, and of course the most expensive thing but the longest lasting is concrete. So you can look at those things if you want to go into bigger boxes. It pays to shop around and kind of look at other people's yards too. When you go for a walk, if you go for a walk in town, sometimes you run across things that, oh, that looks pretty nice. And if you've got the right spot in your yard, go for it. So this is kind of a nice shape here where you've got a different type of pattern, kind of like a Zen moment, I guess, but you can plant your plants different shapes sometimes are more appealing, and sometimes they don't work in your yard. It depends on the shape of your yard. Oops, did I go too far? I'm just making sure. So those wooden boxes you can do with different shapes. Generally the galvanized ones come in certain shapes. You can't really alter them that much.
That Zen garden
Requires more
looked like
watering than ground gardens like your ordinary garden, because anything that's raised above the land is going to drain better and drain faster. So those are some of the things that they still require watering, not as much as the pots, but they still require a lot of watering. Produce higher yields as they have better root space and usually nicer soil for the roots to go down, softer soil, and are easier to maintain. Materials used should be based on how long you want to use it. So as we talked about, treated and untreated wood, as versus it really depends on how long you want that box to last. And it also depends on whether you're comfortable with a treated material. We'll talk about that in a minute. Materials used should be based on how long you want it to last. More expensive materials last longer, but you will be needing the box. But are you going to need the boxes after 7 years or 10 years? My case, maybe not. I'm getting a little older. I probably will still be out there, but so the untreated pine lasts 5 to 7 years. Pressure treated pine is 15 to 20. Since 2003, they've been treating them with a little safer material. Before that, it was basically arsenic, and they still would said you could plant in those boxes even if it was garden box, for garden vegetables, but you needed to stay back from the sides, and generally they would leach straight down, but right at the edges you didn't want them to pick it up. One of the fellows mentioned that usually your vegetables, if they were taking up the toxins, they would be dead before you ever ate them. So the plants themselves wouldn't tolerate them. But this material is a little bit better material. Sometimes your plants need copper and in order to grow properly. So safer treatments since then, but check with the guy that's providing you the material. Make sure that they're treating it with something a little safer that can be used with garden material. We don't want to have a whoops. It's best just to double check with him or check with her or whoever you're buying the material from. Pressure treated is more expensive, but then again, it lasts longer. The other options that you can do is with pressure treated woods. If you've got a double height, you can treat the bottom part because everything's going to go down, but not and use untreated wood on the upper level where the roots are actually going to be. So they're not picking up any treatment whatsoever, but the stuff that's sitting on the ground, which is more likely to rot faster, got treated so it will last longer. Then you just replace the upper part instead of replacing the whole thing. Alternatives to untreated wood would be cypress, redwood, and cedar. They last longer, up to 15 years. They're more expensive, but they stand up better to moisture, and they have natural insect damage repellent, naturally repellent for insects. And these, like I said, can last up to 15 years. If you're nervous of the pressure treatment, you can always line the inside of the box so that with plastic, or there is weather sealants that you can get that are safe to paint the insides of the box. If you're working with treated wood, though, they recommend you wear gloves while you're sawing the material and putting them together, and a dust mask just so that you're not breathing in the dust. So tips on the wooden boxes if you're building them. 8 feet by 4 feet is a nice size. It's easy to reach across, and you can take an 8-foot 2 by 10 and cut it in half, and you'll get 3 boards, and then you've got if you cut it in half, you've got the ends and you've got 2 sides. If you want a double height, then of course you double that. But that's a nice size to reach across. You want this to be comfortable. So you can make it wider only if you've got access from both sides. You've got to be able to reach the middle from both sides if you're going around. You can make them bigger that way. But if you make them too big, you end up, I had one box that, one flower bed that I had to crawl into to be able to reach it. And of course, then you have to be careful to tiptoe around your plants. So you do want to be able to work that box comfortably. The depth, if you're looking for seniors, 3.5 feet high, you're not bending over so much. A little bit, with 2.5 feet for people in wheelchairs is about the norm. But there again, if you're dealing with somebody in a wheelchair, or if you're dealing with yourself, we're not all created equal. Some of us are taller, some of us are shorter. Measure yourself out, see what's comfortable for you. It might be a 1/2 foot difference, so check that out. Make a flat sitting board on the top of the box. It's really nice when you can set one cheek on the box and put your coffee down and sit and just reach and grab the weeds. So those little shelves are really nice to have. So here's one of the boxes that Phil made. He's got in these cases, they're standing boxes, so they're a little bit taller, so you don't have to reach as much. He's lined them with plastic that will hold the moisture a little bit longer and keeps the moisture away from the wood, so it might not rot as quickly. But this little shelf is what I'm talking about. It's really nice to have so that you can kind of set things down on it, or when they're sitting on the ground, then you those are nice if you've got them made strong enough to kind of, like I say, sit a bit on the edge. These are the boxes that we had at the community garden. So they're sitting down. We'd sit all on the edge here. Kyle helped make some of these. Lots of screws in it. Definitely use screws so that they're held together. They actually recommend that on the shorter end, the screws go in from this direction to that direction because most of the pressure is going to be on this. If you do it the other way, going this way in, that will pop out easier. You can still have the screws pop out, but there's less pressure on the ends. So going from the short ends in. These ones were untreated. We had the wood donated to us, so we built them, and they've been there about close to 7 years, I guess now. So they're starting to get to, they're still plenty strong. They still got lots of life in them, but you can tell they're starting to wear. Here's a nice little box on wheels that you can put some of your vegetables into. You wouldn't have to bend over so far. These are kind of more for decks and stuff where you don't have a lot of space. But definitely the wheels make a difference when you want to move them around or put them up closer to a wall for winter or just to shift them around if you're doing something. It makes a big difference and you're not trying to pack something heavy. And then you can do the different shapes and different stars and things like this. You can have all kinds of, it's basically your imagination on what you do with these. Here's one I kind of liked when I saw this, is it's got all of your herbs in it with dividers. And as I mentioned with my box, sometimes I'm sticking stuff in and then they get entwined and then you're trying to figure out which one is which if you're not as familiar with that particular plant. And in this case, you can easily reach in and figure out which plant is this type of herb. So there is so many different types. The other trick with growing herbs is make sure you keep cutting them back because they can get pretty tall pretty quickly. Here is a pallet that they've converted over. They put little pieces of wood underneath and they grow the plants in the pallets. And this way they kind of just water from the top. They can get their hoses in there, water them. It's just something that you can do cheaply because pallets are easy to come by. And this is another thing you can do with pellets. Requires a lot more watering, but you've got pots in there that would work pretty nicely. So that's another option. Okay, so how did I get out of here? I'm going to go back and see if there's questions.
Top left button on the keyboard.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so any questions about that part of it? Or is everybody still good?
One thing about that Zen looking garden is it looked like it was easy to weed because you could get
Yeah.
all the way around both sides.
Right. Yeah, it looked really nice to me. If you've got the space for it, in town, a lot of times we're building our boxes up close to the fence. In that case, you want to make sure that you can reach across it all the way because you're not going to get around close to the fence. But if you've got the space for it, it makes a nice little place just to go and sit in the mornings and think about things. So it's just comforting to look at. And different things appeal to different people. So just because I like it doesn't mean you guys like it. Or if there's different pots that you don't like, you go with the one that you like the best. You're the one looking at it. You're the one that's going to be enjoying it. Okay. Any other questions?
Could you use like railway ties or power poles?
With the railway ties, I had them in my flower bed for years. They lasted for a long time. Never had an issue, but I didn't really put the flowers right up against it. When it comes to railway ties for vegetables, you definitely want to be away from the side, and you want to purchase old ones. You don't want freshly ones with creosol in it. They don't generally recommend them when you're growing vegetables in them, but you could get by with putting plastic down the inside, or putting them well back is the recommendation. I myself, I don't know if I'd want to grow my vegetables right next to creosol. Okay. They do work well because those lasted almost 30 years. For flowers and things, I wouldn't be so worried about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Look at that. You can just flip it right across.
Boom.
Okay, here we go again. How are we doing time-wise?
Go until you're done.
Huh?
Go until you're done.
No, we don't have to.
Yes, you can.
I go faster. Galvanized steel, so it lasts longer. It's coated with zinc now to prevent corrosion. There's no leaching of toxins into the soil, so that's what is good about them. They hold moisture better than the wood, as wood will wick up moisture in dry weather, or wick it away from the soil that's in the boxes. But it still needs more watering than a ground garden because it will dry out. They're easy to assemble. They quite often, you can purchase them and then you just assemble them. But they're usually, you can get them in different shapes, but they're usually ones that you have to take this shape or another shape, and you can't bend it around yourself as easily. You can do it, bend it into shapes if you get the really lightweight stuff. Those are a little cheaper. They don't last as long, and you're on your own. You're kind of doing it on your own because they don't come in kits. They're lightweight for moving. You decide you want to move it, you can shift it easy. Mind you, I'm not sure I'd want to shift it too much. When you put that much soil or that much work into it, it's not much fun moving it around. So it depends. If you want something that's really long lasting, you've got a perfect spot for it and you're good with it. You can get it in different colors now. I've seen them in forest green. I know there's other colors out there, so depending on where it's at in your yard. Okay. Tips for the galvanized steel: take care in assembling them. Watch for sharp edges. Make sure you're wearing your gloves. I was watching a guy on YouTube put one together and he cut his hands about 3 times and then he put on his gloves. I think it's a man thing. Anyway, may need to edge to protect from sharp edges, like an edging on the top and on exposed edges after you're done, just to make sure you don't get a kid that comes along and touches the top and gets cut. Not as pleasing as wood, but it doesn't matter depending on the placement, and different available colors can make them more appealing. And like I say, if you like the look, that's entirely up to you. It's what you're happy with. So here's a steel tub that's been used as a raised flower or raised bed, cucumbers and so forth. This one is actually made out of a vinyl kind of planking. So you can purchase these things. That vinyl works quite well because it lasts quite a while, but if it's too light, then you're going to end up with it breaking down in the sunlight, because plastics do tend to start to crumble after a number of years. What else we got? Okay, so filling these boxes, this is where it becomes tricky with the bigger boxes, especially if you've got taller ones. It can be extremely expensive. And I mentioned this 18 inches to what you're going to do is fill the bottom of the box with cheaper material. So if you've got a garden and you've got access to some soil, fill the bottom with some soil that is not as good, but try not to go solid clay, because then it doesn't drain as well. So you're filling the bottom with some soil. Sometimes you can even put in logs and branches, compost, grass clippings, to bring the level up to that 18 inches, and you can get away with 10 inches from the top, because a lot of your crops don't go much more than the 10 or 12 inches. But if you try to fill that big tub, that 8x4 tub, with bought soil, bags of bought soil, we'll just go down here, an 8x4 foot box, and this is only one tier. If you tried to fill that one tier, a 10-inch tier, you're looking at 24 cubic feet for just the top half of that double tiered box. That's 16 bags of Miracle-Gro. So that's going to cost you a fair amount. If you save that for doing just the top tier rather than that, think of it as if that's 2 tiers, that's double that amount. So it can be up to $350 or so for filling it with that type of soil. Plants such as, so you can throw logs in, branches, as they break down. They turn into soil and compost. So it's not like you're going to have, they'll break down and they'll become soil and compost themselves. Every year, as you take your plants out of those boxes, you're going to be losing a little bit of soil if you don't shake the roots off really well, and even then you're still going to be losing some soil. And your soil depth will start to drop. But with these types of materials, it's not going to drop a lot. With your store-bought Miracle-Gro, that soil is mostly chippings. They talked about, I'm just trying to see if I've got it here. It's mostly peat and some of the corn clippings, and it's not what they call soil from the garden. It's compost, basically. And yourself, as you look in your compost boxes, your compost that was full at the end of the year will be about half that amount by the time it decomposes. So fill your bottom of the box with cheaper material. You can use these logs and branches, compost clippings. You can use your compost I would say the compost for the upper end, and mix it in with some soil. A lot of the bags will tell you to try to mix 50-50 with soil. And this is so that it doesn't degrade as bad, so you're not losing a lot of soil within 2 years. So we gave you the figures for the 8x4 box. Bottom line is, when you go to fill these boxes, buy your garden soil in bulk. Go to your gravel dealers. Some of them have special garden mixes that you buy them in bulk, because it'll be a lot cheaper for you to do it that way. Then you can mix in your sheep manure. You can mix in your sea soil and make it into a slightly better material that way. So, as I mentioned, if you read on the bag, a lot of times it's wood chips, corn, peat, organic matter, it'll lose 75% of its mass within 2 years as it breaks down. So they do in some bags, they don't say it on all bags, they suggest you mix 50-50 with soil. So 16 bags of Miracle Grow is a lot of money. So buy your soil in bulk. They suggest you fill your boxes late in summer, early fall. Give the organic matter time to break down so that you can add other stuff to it. Organic matter as it breaks down, and straw is famous for this. It uses nitrogen as it breaks down, so that nitrogen is not available to the plants. Once it breaks down, then it starts to release nutrients back for the plants, but for that first little while, it's using the nitrogen out of the soil, so you don't want it to be total organic matter. Here's some other ideas compared to the boxes. Lots of people have seen the barrels where they spill out the flowers. Here's another idea. Get that old log out of the field and crack her open. Fill her up. You could get tons. This is at a farm up in the Nearland area in Barrhead here. They took their old wagon, filled it with flowers. This was also Judy Bones' place just outside of Barrhead. The Virginia creeper had turned red for the fall. You can really add color and things into flowers. Now, when it comes to your vegetable gardens, you can decorate with vegetables. Just use lots of really neat textures and colors. Your cabbage plants look kind of neat mixed in with other plants because of the texture of them. Cabbages will require quite a bit of space, but you've got your kohlrabi and you've got your beets and the different colors of leaves and stuff. Just try to make sure your plants are like fairly similar things. If you've ever done any companion gardening, you can figure out which plants like which plants. Tomatoes, of course, are famous for deck plants. Here's an old stump. You chop out the inside, fill it with soil, and you can stick stuff in there. This person got very creative, weaved the grass to make it look like it's in a pot, but it's actually grass that's been weaved. Some people are talented, I'm not. So other mentions, fabric bags, they can be moved easily. Sometimes you can, if you've got something that you can move them into the garage. If you've got tubers in there, like a flower tuber, or you can move it into the garage if it's heated. You just have to kind of watch out that sometimes the gasoline from the smell of the car, some plants are not excited about it, so try to cover them a little bit. So raised beds can be made out of just soil in the garden. You can make a 4x4 raised bed. In my case, I had some old window boxes that I stuck out in this garden because it was a rented garden. It was wet all the time. Took the soil from the side, threw it in, and they were just about 10 inches deep. Threw some zucchini in there. The zucchini covered the boxes, and everybody thought I was just a miraculous gardener, but I wasn't. Okay. They were just taller to start with. So raised squares of soil can also act like these boxes, and mentally to go weed them, you go out and you weed a raised little bed instead of the whole garden. It's easier. Strawberry barrels, I always found them difficult to overwinter. If you've got a heated garage, and wrap them, you can keep them, but they tend to, some years they would grow back and other years they froze out. So we didn't have a heated garage. Ours is separate. Here's just a little tip on how to mark some of your rows. Get busy painting in the winter. Our new garden site for the community garden has lots of rocks. Feel free to come get them. And we'll just stop there for a second again. Any questions on that part of it? Are we all good? Okay. You guys can hear me well enough, right? Okay, just let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try to speak up a little louder. Okay, so here we go over to here. Okay, some basic plant basics. Do you know your plant zone? Most of us are in a 3A or 3B. Apparently I have to correct my typing. So we're mostly in those zones. However, that doesn't mean in your yard you can't find a zone that's a little higher. Anything on the south side of the house up against the house will raise that zone from a 4 to a 5 or even a 6 depending on the direction it's facing. So the south side of buildings is usually warmer. If in my case my garden's surrounded by trees, so they that are well enough back that I can still grow the garden, but I get frost later than most people. I can leave the garden out there just a bit longer. North and northwest sides of the building are colder. You get and subject to drying winter winds, so you're getting winds from the northeast, and it's cooler for the winter. And if that wind is dry, it's going to drain the moisture out of your shrubs and trees and things like that. So if you've got a sensitive rose bush, you want to find a nice sheltered place on the south side where you stand a chance of overwintering it. We also have some plants out there that like it to be a little bit cooler. And so if you get a 30-degree weather day in the middle of summer, throw some remake cloth over it. It looks like interface cloth that they used to use in for sewing with. It's just a light material you can throw across the plants, and it will keep the scorching heat off on those days. And of course, watering them during the cool of the day in the morning and at night is better for them. Drought proofing becomes a big issue. So you're going to water to root depth when they're seedlings. If your seedling is only a ½ inch deep, you got to make sure they're wet or they will die if they dry out. Once established, you can water less often, but soak it in well. You're trying to encourage the roots to go down. As the surface dries, the roots will grow deeper to get to the moisture area below, and you can actually encourage the roots to go a bit deeper. And usually when it's deeper, it's wetter for longer periods of time. When you're fertilizing, water before fertilizing. You want the fertilizer to get to the roots down below, not sit on top. And water a bit more with after you've fertilized it, just to get it down there. This will get the fertilizer deeper down to encourage roots to grow deeper. And with dry fertilizer, make sure you water it in well, because the same thing, you want to get it down deeper. Once the roots are down that deep, you don't have to water as often, usually once a week, but a good soaking. Make sure that it's well soaked then. Plants to grow. So most garden vegetables are going to grow in containers. Carrots, lettuce, herbs, beets, onions, garlic. Garlic likes a little bit more organic material, and garlic grows best if you put it in the fall. Are a few examples. The asparagus, when you put it into pots and you've got that soil degrading in the pot, it doesn't like the soil variation. Rhubarb, the same thing. A lot of the perennials have difficulties in pots because it changes too much, and trying to overwinter them is difficult unless you've got a good place to overwinter them with. So pots will lose too much soil too quickly as they degrade and are difficult to overwinter. Small fruits requiring trellises do not do as well. Oops, went too far, sorry. Corn doesn't do as well. It needs at least 16 plants, but like I said, you can grow corn. I've done it with 6 plants, but you have to kind of shake them and get them fertilized, or you might have some difficulty. There again, the big point of this is know your plant. Know what they like and what they don't like. And then you can generally figure out how to work around some of these things. Understand your plants. How do they spread? Horseradishes, I wouldn't grow them anything in but a container. Chives, the same thing. They kind of get carried away. They creep along, and the next thing you know, you're fighting them all over the garden. So those are good for in the containers. Horseradish, you're just going to have to kind of wrap it up well I think it would survive the winter. It seems to survive no matter what you do if you're trying to get rid of it. So chives and common spreaders need to be confined. You don't want to lose control of them. Same applies to flowers. If you've got flowers that you're not familiar with, use the internet. If they're spreading by the root system or have lots and lots of seed, you're going to have difficulty controlling them unless you've contained them somehow. Know your plants, so can't express that enough. So there's some cool rooted plants like clematis that like to put their roots around. If they've got a corner to go around and under some blocks where it's shade, they do better. There again, know your plants. Some only germinate in cooler soil like spinach. Once you grow spinach in the spring and try to reseed it, it doesn't do as well unless you've got some good shade. Saskatoons need shade. They do not like a lot of sun. So, weeds. Make good choices. Purchase only non-invasive plants. It is illegal to bring plants and seed from other countries. So lots of times I listen to people and, oh, they saw a plant in another country and they stuck it in their baggage. You don't want to be the person that brings a seed into the country that's going to wreak havoc on our agricultural system. You're going to get more than you bargained for in some cases, so do your research. Even seeds from seed catalogs may be weeds that are considered prohibitive or noxious weeds in Alberta. So if they're not growing here, you've got to be really cautious. Make sure that they're not spreading by root systems, or in the case of some of our weeds where they produce 300,000 seeds, you're going to run into some issues. Perennial snapdragon, I've seen lots in seed catalogs. It's toadflax here, and that's a bad weed here. They're very difficult control. They'll take off over your grass and they're like quackgrass. Pretty. A lot of weeds are pretty, but so plants that were introduced in the homestead days can cause problems. Check reliable sources like this website. I don't know if anybody wants that website. We'll get back to you on that in a minute because we're kind of running out of time here. There's this pamphlet that you can get, and across the top is some of the plants that were brought in at one time, placed in gardens, and they were beautiful, but now they've become a problem. And they're talking about all these other ones that you should grow instead of these ones. Here's one of them, Himalayan balsam, also known as poor man's orchid. Beautiful plant, grows really like crazy, is gorgeous. But these little things, when their seed, the pods pop, they can pop 20 feet or better. So all of a sudden you've got these pods popping, they end up on the driveway. You pick them up on your car tires and off to the lake you go, and now you've got a mess around the shore of a lake. This is another one that we see quite a bit, common tansy. It's tough to get rid of, can cause abortions in cattle. In fact, that's kind of why it was brought to this country, was to help some girls out of trouble. In small amounts, it can be used for other things, but it takes over the native vegetation, and as a result, you end up with deer and elk and everything else having issues out there because of it. It takes over some of the grass and stuff that they should be eating and end up with that. Purple loosestrife, you guys have heard a lot. We see this in people's yards all the time. Brought over, beautiful plant, grows really nice, but this is what can happen if it gets near a lake. Same thing, seeds end up on driveways, get picked up, and away they go in the cars. Oxeye daisy and scentless chamomile. Oxeye daisy was actually the parent plant of the Chasta daisy. They crossbred it to make it Chasta daisy not so invasive. But over time, if you've got it in your yard over time and it starts to take off, your Chasta daisy starts to take off through the grass, it's reverted back to the parent plant. And now you've got trouble getting it under control. So watch for the Chasta daisy in your wild seed mixes. Quite often they'll put it in and it becomes a problem. anything in wild seed mixes, you should look up and make sure it's not going to be an issue down the road. Some do have them in. Many of them are very good, but check and see what's in them. This is scentless chamomile. Beautiful little pretty daisy, beautiful plant. You see it all over the city of Edmonton and all of the uh, vacant lots. It just grows. It looks gorgeous. You think, oh, it'd be nice to bring this home and put it in my garden. 300,000 seeds per plant. And the minute you till it, it's down in the soil, and every time you till it, it's going to start to grow again. And you're looking at 25 years of fighting this thing. So here's one that Kyle really liked, this Jimson weed and devil's weed. Came up in canola seed, and it's a beautiful plant, nice, beautiful trumpet, pods that look really kind of neat, grows 6 feet tall, lovely, except it's highly, what's the word I'm looking for?
Poisonous?
It's poisonous. And if you touch the plant or if you burn the plant and smell the fumes, you get a high that is really not a pleasant high. So people were trying to pick this with gloves and bagging it, and the plants were sticking out in the field. So watch anything of these. There is some out there that are related. This one's the most toxic, so kind of keep an eye on things. Because again, there's the plant itself. It grows very quickly, very fast, and is quite tall in the field. Here's the perennial snapdragon I was talking about. Beautiful, but it's toad flax here, and it takes over everything. So it's got a root system like quackgrass, beautiful, but it's not the best for cattle. So other pests and friends, there's birds. They really like to eat your pea seedlings. So I cover mine with remade cloth when the peas are coming up because the birds have decided to like them. You've got insects. You should encourage beneficial insects like the ladybugs and these wasps. There's many, many different kinds of these wasps that attack some of the insects that are not beneficial. Bee houses for solitary bees. Go with very different types of tubing because not all bee houses are created equal. And flowers for honeybees and bumblebees. They're native and they help pollinate the rest of the garden. Purchase for falcons if you've got gopher issues, but if you have small pets, cats or small dogs, do not use this. And clean up your gardens and fallen apples. These encourage coyotes. They will eat your carrots and fruit. Oh, and there's this guy. This is the bottom of my house. They walk right by me. They ask for a back scratch. So the fun of gardening, we're always learning, whether you're 5 or 100. We always have, there's always brand new ideas, new developments, new plant varieties. If something is working for someone else, steal their ideas, do it shamelessly. I've learned so much over the last couple of years. So one of the things I learned is raising the onion bed and scraping away the soil from the onion itself, only to leave the root in the soil. It made a nicer onion and less rot. So enjoy the company and the fresh air and the laughs. And so hopefully that left some time for questions. How are you guys doing? Did I put everybody to sleep?
Interesting. Yeah, very good.
Okay.
So before everybody runs off, I just wanted to quickly jump in here. Marilyn, I'm incredibly sorry. I missed introducing you when we started.
That's okay. We were running out of time.
Yeah. So everybody, this is a little late, but this is Marilyn. She has a career worth of experience with the as an egg fieldman and also with Barrhead County, or I guess it's County of Barrhead. Sorry.
Mhm.
And she has a lot of experience also with the Barrhead Community Gardens. So thank you for doing this, and I very much appreciate what I've learned. So if anybody else has any questions, I'm kind of curious to come over there and hear what everybody wants to chat about. And then we also do have a giveaway, so I'll get someone in the EOC to pull a name for me.
Okay. The one thing I wanted to know, because I wasn't sure if I was hitting the mark or not, if that's the kind of information you guys wanted. So if there's questions, then by all means hit me up right now, and it'll give me a little chance to fix my presentation more geared to what you guys are looking for. Oh, okay. So who have I got here? So we have a question on, okay.
No, thank you.
Oh, looking into recycling some of the rough wood. Yes, you can recycle rough wood. Just make sure it's not treated with something that is going to be harmful. Because we've had, sometimes the wood is treated with different stuff. Usually when you're buying wood and it's for the garden, if it's that pressure treated wood, they've gone to the other material. But older material can be treated with arsenic and it lasts a long time, so there is a chance that you could end up with that stuff. So just kind of be careful of what kind of recycled rough wood you're looking at. Okay. 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 So I take it, I guess my question is there something else that we could have talked about that would have made it better? Okay, I'm just reading one question here. Just hang on. Yeah, the container gardening, if you're downsizing, you do grow a lot of produce in these boxes. Like in those garden boxes I showed you at our community garden, if we have a couple of empty ones that they're made basically for people that are having mobile issues in the garden itself. So we give them out to people that are having problems bending down, and they can grow lots of stuff in those boxes. But if we end up with 2 or so boxes that aren't being used, we put a lot of carrots, and we get a lot of carrots out of there for the food bank. So they grow pretty nice size and straight down. Yeah, with the vegetables that shouldn't be grown into the same containers, um, you're basically looking at what each of those plants likes. Some people thoroughly believe in the companion gardening, and I do some of my gardening according to that. A lot of times, if you're putting some plants beside the next plant, you're kind of trying to discourage beetles and things from coming close. Marigolds are a good example, but they're flower more. You're trying to encourage those plants to chase away beetles from the plants that they like, or sometimes you can get plants that just absolutely don't like each other. But you're looking more as to whether or not that plant needs tons of water. Root crops together are pretty good as a rule. You got to make sure you're planting in plants that don't shade each other. So to give you specifics, I've pretty much grown, as long as I know that the plants are similar, either they like their feet cool or like to germinate and cool, I try to keep those kinds together, because it's really difficult to get a plant to germinate, one that likes it hot and one that likes it cold. Peas are an example of that. They kind of like cooler temperatures to germinate, and so does spinach, whereas cucumbers and some of those other tomatoes like it a little bit warmer. So I'm just looking at where did I see that? Okay. The tomatoes will generally outcrowd your smaller vegetables. It depends on the size of your pot. I put flowers around the bottoms of my tomatoes. I haven't, but you probably could get away with, I'm just trying to think of an example. As long as you prune the tomatoes up, the problem with the tomatoes, they get quite large and they tend to shade out anything below them. And depends on the size of the pot you've got. Trying to think. If the cucumbers are allowed, if you could probably get away with cucumbers if they're allowed to flow over the sides of the pot. And also one thing too, with pots, you can get, most vegetables, you can get pot sized, like cucumbers, you can get them that they don't spread. They grow to the size of the pot and they grow up. So you can get those types of pots or types of plants that are made for container growing. Okay. Okay, a variety of tree to put in the bottom of a large container. Your spruce trees can be a little bit acidic, like your needle trees. Poplar trees is probably what I'd more recommend. Birch trees.
Into a container?
Yeah, like at the bottom of the container, as mentioned, you could put logs in there to
Put
use
space.
up space so that you're not filling it with good soil.
Thing that you grow. Put a tree.
Okay, I hope that answers that. Yes, you can use Rubbermaid totes for potatoes. Make sure, of course, you'll have to drill holes in the bottom of it because otherwise they'll rot or they'll be too wet. But if you put Rubbermaid or put holes in the bottom, the bags work really good. The cloth bags work really good for potatoes too because you can just take the potato and dump them out of the bag, and so you can use that. Okay, I think I reached the end. Did I miss anybody? If there's anybody's question I missed, because was a few of them here, just let me know. You can unmute yourself and tell me. Okay. All right, I think, is that pretty well all the questions then? Amber?
Do you guys have any more questions? I think on our end, that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
I did draw the name, and it was Lois Terpensky. Did I say your last name right? It was you? Sorry. So you, that little bag is for you, little kiss. That was awesome. But thank you so much, Marilyn. And I guess if there's any more questions on our end, you guys are more than welcome to sit and chat for a little bit, have some cookies. But sorry, Kyle, there's cookies here.
Are you serious?
There's no cookies here. Okay. So hopefully that answered most of them. If you guys got other ideas on topics that I missed, let Amber know, okay? All right. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Really nice talking to you. Bye.
Thank you.